I am really curious and excited about our next talk. Neil Goldstein will be talking about light, and one of my favorite topics. I've studied film and cinema, and my teacher always told us, come not knowing anything, so you can see the place for the first time and study light. So I have a personal passion for this, and I'm excited for your talk. Neil, please.
Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here at TedxYouth at EMIS. And I'm here today about light, just like I was introduced just a second ago. So to start off, my name is Neil Goldstein. You guys all know that. And my specialty is that of a visual artist in the entertainment field. My specialty lies within photons, the particles that are emitted from light. And that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today. Light, where did it come from? How did we get to control it? And where are we taking it into the future? For centuries, humans have longed to understand that which they do not know. And once we have a grasp of a new understanding, how do we control what we have just learned? And when, as it was just explained, coming to know nothing, when I first started in lighting, I knew absolutely nothing. I came into lighting and knew that everything was really hot, and electricity was extremely dangerous, and for some reason, every light was extremely heavy. And I didn't know why. But after years of working with light and getting a deeper understanding and knowledge of what it is that I was doing, I was able to come to some conclusions about how to interact with it, what to do with it, and kind of foresee where it's probably taking us. And that's what I want to share with you today. In terms of the overall theme, ways to discovery, in 1905, Albert Einstein talked about in his paper, Photon Complex, which won him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921, what is a photon? And he described a photon to have 5 absolute principles. And these principles are mathematically proven to be light reflection, light absorption, light convergence, light divergence, and black body radiation. Well, the science is good and all that, but it was a really hard paper to get through because I understood almost none of his mathematics. So let's talk about this in a more simplistic terms. An orange. In the English language, this object is the name of its color. But why do we see orange? Has anyone ever stopped to think about why we see orange? The reason we see orange is because the photons emitted from the lights converge onto the exterior of the orange. The orange can actually absorbs the green, the blue, and the violet wavelengths, as well as some of the reds and some of the yellows. And what's reflected back to our eye is orange. And that's what we perceive as color. These wavelengths that are reflected back and those that are not absorbed from objects. That's what we interpret from the world around us. Now, enough of this science stuff aside, because I'm sure if you ask a scientist what light is, he'll probably tell you it's a particle and a wave. Well, that's fine, but in realistic terms, how do we simplify that? If we ask a soldier what is light, a soldier might say light is what gives him situational awareness, something that will help him complete his mission and understand the world around him. But if we ask an artist what is light, an artist should tell you, and how I personally feel, that light is single-handedly the most important tool for conveying a visual message to an audience. But controlling 4 aspects of a light, a single light source, you can convey happiness, sadness, scared, all these emotions just by controlling a light's height, angle, intensity, and color. So let's talk about this for a second in terms of the absence of light. Let's say you're sleeping. There's no light. Eventually the sun rises, light starts shining in through the window, and eventually we wake up. We start to see things around us because photons are interacting with our retina, converting these signals into pictures, and we now have situational awareness. And what is one of the first things we do? We turn on the TV, check our cell phones, and we don't really think too much about that. After we're done with the sports, weather, and traffic and Facebook, we're ready to go throughout our day. But think about that for a second. The day, the work day. A long time ago, we didn't have these fancy LEDs. We didn't have all this technology to interact with. All we had was a work day, When the sun goes down, that's it. 4 o'clock at the middle of December, you go home. You're done. So where did we start understanding where lights could help us in terms of entertainment and things of that nature? Well, before that, we already knew that it could give us fire, it could give us the ability to cook food and scare away predators. But if we look at the works of William Shakespeare was able to articulate within his writing the ability to dictate lighting cues. And he had no ability to control light. All he had was a sun. The sun rose, there was a midday, and then a sunset. And that's what he had to work with. We had to understand verbally from the characters lighting cues to understand the world around these actors. And it wasn't until the development of agriculture and cities growing where it became a law in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, depending on where you were in the world, that it was actually mandated by law to hang lights outside to help passersby if you had a house facing the street. And during this time period, these 300 years, one of the things that we really longed for was some sort of lighting control, because at the time all we had was candles. And the candles, of course, at these moments just used beeswax and mostly fats from animals because they were more accessible than beeswax. And eventually we came to an item called an argand lamp. What is an argand lamp, aside from something that's really complicated to pronounce occasionally? Well, this is an argand lamp. An argand lamp used the same fuels, the same fats, the same waxes found within a candle, but what it did was it combusted these chemicals in a different way that enabled us to have 6 to 10 times the output of light than that of a standard candle. And for the first time in history, we can actually look and say that is the turning point when we first started having lighting control. Because before that, all we had was basically a stick with fire, and that was it. The argand lamp was used for a very long time. It was eventually brought from high-class society down into the theater world, where we were using that as practicals. And a practical is an interior light on a set that is designed to help us accent what it is that we're, the world around us. And when you combine this argand lamp with the gas lamp technologies of that day in theater, you could now have the ability to directly control where on set you wanted to have your light. Along with these argand lamps, I had mentioned the gas lamps, which also started to have a reflector behind the actual light source that enabled reflection towards the actors or wherever the artist wanted the light to be conveyed to, as well as dimmer control. Now, it's very, I would say, primitive in terms of just opening and closing a gas spigot, but these were the very first tools that we had, and these are what lighting designers had to work with. So it took pretty much the burning down of a theater, and I don't mean to go too deep into that, but eventually, gas is dangerous. That was the biggest con of this era, of the gas era, was that it's very dangerous, and eventually a theater burned down because of it. So scientists and innovators were wondering what it is that we can do to improve upon this technology. And a man by the name of Charles F. Brush from Cleveland, Ohio, my hometown, he invented a light called the carbon arc. What you're looking at here in these pictures are 2 pieces of carbon, and when you strike an electrical force between them, you get a voltaic arc in the form of light. Basically, you're almost mimicking the color temperature of the sun by combusting materials this way. And this light was mass-produced, sent around the world to factories, to lighting, to different institutions in terms of libraries and that. And how it worked was it actually had an intentional reflector behind it that optimized the light source that was in front of it in order to push a light towards a subject with intent. And we took this technology in the entertainment world and we created something called the limelight, the very first ever spotlight, where you could, as an artist, as a designer, say to your lighting tech up in wherever he is with his spotlight, turn it on, that's where I want my light, that's when I want my light. And we could actually have control and follow an actor around the stage to illuminate them and illuminate other parts of the stage as well. During this time period that the carbon arc was very popular, there was another inventor, also from Ohio, that was living during the same time period by the name of Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, we all know him as being credited for the invention of the tungsten light bulb. The tungsten light bulb would eventually go on to revolutionize lighting. But before it revolutionized lighting, it did a few other very interesting things. Edison not only invented a light bulb, but he invented the backbone of electrical distribution to propel his invention forward. Because without the ability to distribute electricity, a light bulb in itself does nothing. It's an object that just sits there. So Edison invented his DC electricity, lit up the building of J.P. Morgan one day, but at the same time he was having a consistent battle with that of Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla, the inventor of AC, alternating current electricity, was having a huge feud with Edison over whose technology was better. And eventually, at the end of it, AC won this battle. The reasons? Two reasons, actually, two big reasons. One, AC electricity is much cheaper to distribute over long distances, and also the viability of AC electricity made it much more feasible than DC electricity. So I'm trying not to go into too much science about all this, but what we got out of this was a way to finally have electricity distributed throughout our cities, light sources that could illuminate our nights and our architecture around us, interior, exterior. We had just come to the introduction of AC electricity across our cities and our towns, and in the 1920s, GE pushed onto us, I wouldn't say pushed onto us, GE introduced to us the fluorescent lighting. And the fluorescent lighting and tungsten lighting from 1920 up until the early 90s pretty much was the norm for electricity and for lighting. I mean, we had the HMI invention that allowed us to have daylight-based sources for film and television that came in the 1960s. And we also had LEDs, blue LEDs that were invented in the 80s. But these weren't the most practical yet for using for indoor purposes, except for HMIs, which were indoor for film and television. And I mentioned a second ago that blue LEDs were invented in 1980, but they were actually invented in a time way before that. LEDs were originally invented in the 1920s, and it took 60 years to catch the technology up to the point where we could now have a red LED, a green LED, mixed with the 1980s invention of the blue LED to create white light through energy-efficient sources. So the 1980s was a very prosperous time in the lighting industry. And it also gave us, that time period also gave us the Very Light VL1. I don't know how well you guys can see this slide. It's a little dark, I apologize. But this light was the very first moving light that ever moved on any set whatsoever. It was introduced to the Genesis tour in the 80s and completely revolutionized our industry. If you read books about the people who were there at the time, if you talk to anyone who was alive that got to work with these lights, they can definitively tell you that when they saw these lights move by pushing a fader, it changed the game. Entertainment would not be the same whatsoever. And we have all these great technologies that have caught up to today. And you can see a lot of them in use on Barco's press release on the Imagine Dragons tour that's going on. And one of the things that's most interesting, if you look and see, these LED pillars. These pillars never change physically. They stay the exact same size throughout the entire concert. But what these things do is they have very small, high-quality LEDs built within these panels that are controlled by these Barco media servers. And as you can see on the right and on the left, by the designer's mind and a few button pushes and rigging up a bunch of cables, you can control and can completely manipulate your viewer's eye and mind to take you on a journey. And when you combine that with sound, when you combine that with other environmental effects that go on during a show, you are able to create an immersive environment for your entire audience throughout your whole show. And if you think about recording something like this, about 10 years ago this wasn't very viable. Recording something like this was extremely complicated. You needed about twice the amount of light. It was a much bigger endeavor. And the reason for this was because film emulsions were not as fast yet, and also digital camera sensors were not as fast yet. So we had to catch some of those up to be able to even record the technology that we're using today. And if we look at some of the interesting cameras that we use today, this photograph here, shot by Bill Bennett from the American Society of Cinematography, what we're looking at here is an Audi commercial that he shot with an Arri Alexa infrared camera. Arri completely ripped the Bayer sensor out of their Alexa, strapped on some other technologies to it, and allowed it to record everything above a wavelength, completely above 800 nanometers. So Bill Bennett has introduced us to reintroduced black and white photography as an art form that's going to be seen to everybody. It's always been around. Black and white film you can still go and buy, but this is almost concrete recognition that this is not going to go away. And if we look to future things such as non-entertainment venues as to where lights can go and what we can do with it, think about a doctor for a second. This is an image from a company called RealView Imaging. They're based here in Israel. RealView Imaging is working on a scanning technology that allows a doctor to perform a scan on your body and project a three-dimensional manipulable holograph directly in front of the doctor who can examine your insides before ever having to make an incision, so that he never has to be rooting around for things that he can't see because it will be projected in front of him. Today, what is slowly becoming, what was science fiction is becoming slowly science fact. In 2011, Ed Boyden gave a TED Talk, and in this TED Talk, he spoke about the abilities to control brain waves, neurons within the brain via blue light. And some of the things that they can control with this blue light that they've been working on since then is the ability to control seizures and the ability to rectify blindness. And it amazes me that this is where we are going in the future. We're able to literally take what we have thought of 50, 60, 70 years ago as being something of way off into the future and bringing it into reality now. Whether it's for film, television, live entertainment, medical purposes, it doesn't matter. Light is literally shaping the world around us as we know. And I implore you, I ask you, please, when you think about turning on a light, when you go to turn on a light switch, think about what that meant 200 years ago. It didn't exist. And I ask, when you have that moment, if you can have a moment of clarity as to how light is interacting your day, then I feel that I've done some service in bringing a way for you to discover something new about the world that you interact with every day subconsciously. Thank you.